carry on with part 7 of our miniature bust. Where we left off last time was we had just temporarily set the eyes into position so we could have a look at them in the context of the sculpture. And at that time I had decided that I needed to do a little bit more work on this structure, on the brows, and the sockets themselves need a little bit of work. You'll also notice I'm leaving the ears off until much later, mostly because they can really be in the way. If you spend any time sculpting them now, you'll inadvertently squish them and have to re-sculpt them. So I'm just going to leave them completely off for now. So I'm going to move forward with making some basic corrections on some of the primary forms. The other thing I want to do is pretty happy with this shape in terms of its silhouette, but it needs to blend better from here to here and from here up into the jaw. So this needs some work on both sides as well. So I've been using the terms primary and secondary forms. We will talk about tertiary forms. Those are common sculpture terms, but don't get too hung up on them. It's really more about working generally to specific. Start with the general forms and then start to refine them. What are the biggest shapes? Then what are the next level of shapes? And then what's the next level of detail? On and on and on. There's no hard list of definitions of what's a primary form and what's a secondary form, so don't get too hung up on it. If you were to take your finger, for example, the general tube shape, the sausage shape, would be the primary form if you're just seeing this in silhouette. When we start to talk about secondary forms, that's the individual sections of the finger. Okay, these three main lumps, and then the next level would be, okay, well, there's a little bit of a change in the shape here where the nail sits in. There's some variation as one form meets the next. There's kind of this strange little bridge section here, all the wrinkles. That's what we're getting at when we talk about primary and secondary forms and tertiary forms, on and on, is really starting general and then working specific, and that's what we're doing here. And the other thing I'm going to start to do is I am going to start to blend some of these masses together. I like to leave them really rough, so I'm just seeing simple blocks. But how I'm going to approach that, I'm just going to pop these eyes out so I can put them somewhere safe so they don't bounce out onto the floor. So for example, I had talked about making some sort of transition between these jowls and kind of where those folds, those nasolabial folds come down here. So I'll show you a couple different ways of starting to blend things together. So I'm going to make two fairly even pieces, but one there. So a couple ways you can blend is if it's somewhere obvious, you can just blend with your finger like I'm doing here. I'm going to blend those together. Here's where it starts to get sometimes a little difficult to get your hands in there. So this is where you might want to start using a tool and just pull one edge into the other. And again, don't over refine the surface. Trying to keep my hands out of the way. Once you start using a tool, you start to limit your ability to approach the symmetry by using both hands at the same time. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so those are starting to blend together, and obviously I will do that, you know, with all of these forms, and that's going to give me a better idea of where I'm at overall with the forms. Blend these little fat pads together. And so what that's going to do is it's going to identify if I've got any spots that need more mass. So maybe in here, again, certainly from here back, I'm going to spend some time doing that. The other tool you can use to blend shapes, maybe I'll just use the sample piece here. Let's make some imaginary shapes across here. So if these are form, we can smooth down what you can reach with your hands. And then any sort of loop tool, any sort of wire tool is also a good way to blend these forms. And again, it's not so much about carving. It's more about just blending the polymer together. Don't worry about all the little bits. Keep those little bits together. They can work nicely for a tiny little detail later. So if I wanted those folds to be apparent, I would just leave it, but if this is supposed to be one form, I can blend it together different ways. So a little bit of smoothing just to blend them together. So that's where I'm going to head on this one. So some corrections to the structure and starting to blend the forms, and then I'll readdress setting the eyes into place, and then we will work on starting to add the upper and lower lids, and then get into some finer detail, some of those small and subtle forms. So I've done the first kind of level, first pass at blending those forms together, and that's good because, again, it's really it's pointed out where there's some deficiency, where there's some lack of symmetry. I do feel like I'm still too thin in here. I'm not going to get enough of that kind of drooping expression where everything's kind of pulling downwards. With this is too skeletal. A little happier here with that chin line. This in the profile, though, this is a little flat here. I need to just beef that out a bit, and I still haven't addressed this part of the eye socket. But because I've done that first layer of blending, I have a better idea of where I need to go next. And again, I'm okay that it doesn't look anywhere near finished. It's a little bit lumpy. It's not actually even very good, but that's okay. That's what I expect it to be at this point, because we're just slowly refining. Really resist the urge to jump into trying to finish it before it's ready to be finished in terms of getting into details and fine forms. So now I've made most of the corrections to the forms in the brow. Even those out a little bit. I've added quite a bit of mass in these nasolabial folds that become quite exaggerated now. They're almost canine-like. They're a little bit droopy dog-like, if you know who Droopy Dog is. I did flesh out the mouth a little bit, added top and bottom lip and a little more mass to the chin. And if we turn and look at this in profile, I also added quite a bit of mass under here in the neck and further refined this jawline. I do feel like the mouth between the bottom of the nose and the chin is still sitting a little bit flat, so I'll probably push both top and bottom lip outward a little bit, so it's just not this not completely flat. The other thing I've done is I've just placed some balls of plain Sculpey in the eye sockets, and so when I go to place the eyes that we cured earlier, it'll just give them something to sit against. It's important that we set those eyes right away and start working on the lids, because the expression is quite chipper looking, and that's because the eyes appear to be wide open with no indication of any eyelid. It's hard to read it any other way. So what we'll do now is we'll get set up, place the eyeballs in the sockets to the depth and pointing in the right direction, and then we'll sculpt in even some very rudimentary eyelids, and that will really start to bring our expression into focus.